Well, welcome to Southwark Cathedral's most recent podcast in the series The World Needs More Poetry, and I am delighted that I am speaking today to our new Director of Music, Helen Smee. Hello.
Hello, delightful to be here.
This is a wonderful, it's going to be a little introduction to you, but of course it's going to be an introduction to a poem that you've chosen. Let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about you. Where were you born? Where have you been hanging out? What you've been doing?
Well, it's funny being in this space because I was born about 4 miles behind you.
Oh.
So I'm a Londoner and grew up in London, lots of music, lots of, creative arts. My family are all in arts and media and theatre and writing and that kind of thing. Almost all of them. And then I went to university in Cambridge, came back to London to study at the Royal Academy of Music, and then spent about 11 years in London mixing choir freelancing, I guess, with a parish director of music job in South London. Mm-hmm. And then I went to Oxford to run the girl choristers at the Cathedral at Christ Church, from which I've just returned. That's my potted biog.
And your connections with Southwark Cathedral over the years?
Many. My grandparents were both parishioners at the Cathedral. My grandfather was a church warden, cathedral warden. My grandmother ran the bookstore when that was a thing, and then a lot of volunteering and very involved in parish life. And my mum is now very involved in cathedral life. So I've kind of had a lot of family connection, and then my wife and I had our wedding blessing there as well. Yeah. So it's been a kind of constant path through life. Has always kind of led me back to Southwark.
And you haven't been doing it for very long, but are you enjoying it?
I love it. I love it.
That's a relief.
I wouldn't say otherwise, I suppose, in this context, but no, it's a wonderful marriage of the things I love about the cathedral, about cathedrals generally, and the kind of people work that I love doing.
Well, we're very happy to have you. And in this series, we ask a guest to choose a poem, to read the poem, then we have a little chat about it. Are you a poetry person?
It's funny, you said this to me last week, and I responded with what my gut reaction always, which is that I feel the same way about poetry that I feel about cricket, which is that I love it deeply, and then immediately I'm very worried I'm going to be unmasked as some kind of, fake when it comes to it. A bit the same with ballet, actually. I was listening to some really interesting Radio 4 documentary about ballet, and I thought, I love ballet, and yet I feel really uninformed about it. But then lots of people say that to me about music, and I think you don't need to be informed to be a lover of it. Anyway, I do love poetry.
Well, I feel the same about music. So, I love it, but feel amateur. But I often, when people say to me, oh, I don't know how to read a poem because it doesn't make sense, and, I'm scratching my head and I'm getting nowhere, I often say to them, actually, reading a poem is, don't think of it like reading a bit of news or a bit of dense novel that you just can't understand. Think of it more like listening to a piece of music. You'd never say at the end of a piece of music, what does that mean? Yeah. You'd say, what's your response to it? Yeah,
absolutely. And I've been thinking about it a lot, actually, in the last couple of weeks. The response to that question, do you like poetry, if you work with choirs, if you're a solo singer, that is your whole job, is to bring to life poetry. That's the reason that I don't conduct orchestras, is because I love poetry. Mm-hmm. And obviously a lot of that in my line of work is biblical poetry or scriptural poetry. But actually, if you didn't like that, what would you be doing in that role? Because it's all about taking text and delivering it and enlivening it into something that can be consumed in a very close but different way.
Yeah, your job and my job are very similar in that way.
I think so.
We're trying to make the poetry resonant.
And funnily enough, my family has no classical musicians in it apart from me, but it's full of directors and interpreters of words and writers. And I often think, I suspect that they think my job is a little bit left field compared to everybody else in my family. But I actually think what I do is very close to all of those who work in those kind of arts, because it's really the same thing as stage direction. It's the same thing as managing scripts. It's all. My mum worked in TV, and my dad. It's very, very similar, I think.
Well, maybe you and I one day will do what I did when I was at St Paul's with Andrew Carwood, which is I looked at a poet and some of the poems, and then he looked at how they've been translated into music.
Yeah.
And we did some wonderful study mornings.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah, I looked at the words, then you looked at the music that's interpreted them.
Yeah.
That would be fun to do. Anyway, I digress. You have chosen a poem. What have you chosen?
I've chosen The Holy Communion by Henry Vaughan.
Would you like to read it?
I would. Welcome, sweet and sacred feast. Welcome, life. Dead I was and deep in trouble, but grace and blessings came with thee so rife that they have quickened even dry stubble. Thus souls their bodies animate, and thus at first when things were rude, dark, void and crude, they by thy word their beauty had and date. All were by thee, and still must be. Nothing that is or lives, but hath his quickenings and reprieves, as thy hand opes or shuts. Healings and cuts, darkness and daylight, life and death are but mere leaves, turned by thy breath, spirits without thee die, and blackness sits on the divinest wits, as on the sun eclipses lie. But that great darkness at thy death, when the veil broke with thy last breath, did make us see the way to thee, and now by these sure sacred ties, after thy blood, our sovereign good, had cleared our eyes and given us sight. Thou dost unto thyself betroth our souls, and bodies both in everlasting light. Was not enough that thou had paid the price, and given us eyes when we had none, but thou must also take us by the hand, and keep us still awake. When we would sleep or from thee creep, who without thee cannot stand? Was not enough to lose thy breath and blood by an accursed death, but thou must also leave to us that did bereave thee of them both. These seals, the means that should both cleanse and keep us so. Who wrought thy woe? O Rose of Sharon, O the lily of the valley, how art thou now, thy flock to keep, become both food and shepherd to thy sheep?
Thank you very much. Tell us why you've chosen The Holy Communion by Henry Vaughan.
Well, I could have chosen, and nearly did, a lot of different poems by metaphysical poets, who I keep being drawn back to when I think about text, and particularly when I think about text and music, which I think is partly because so many of those poets were set by composers whose work I love, and I find the late 20th century kind of magnetic draw that so many composers had back to that really fascinating. And I suppose on a very basic level, it just really speaks to me. I think there's something so musical about the text. It cries out for that. And, Finzi and Leighton and Vaughan Williams and Howells, so many of them couldn't resist going back to this rich seam, I think. I love this particular poem, which is so evocative you can taste it. It's so vivid, and there's so much theology packed into it.
Yeah, there certainly is.
It's called The Holy Communion, and it's about everything in Christian life, in one poem.
It's about a lot of different communions, isn't it? All of which are holy.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, let's look at it in a moment. Let's just remind ourselves a bit about Henry Vaughan. I was telling you earlier, I once had to give a paper to the Henry Vaughan Society, and the name Henry Vaughan now gives me PTSD because Rowan Williams was sitting on the front row as I was giving this, which of course is the death to all confidence. But there I was near the River Usk, which is where he lived for most of his life in the parish of Franside. Born 1621, lived quite a long time actually. Died 1695. Probably the major Welsh poet of the Commonwealth period. But living most of his life on Newton Farm in that part of Wales. Was for a short while in the army, in a battle or two, which had an effect on him, and it led to a revisiting of his purpose in life and led to a conversion. And I suppose the reason I know about him a little bit is because of the legacy of George Herbert. If you want to study, and Herbert being one of my favourites, if you want to study how Herbert's been received through the generations, he was so pivotal to the conversion and to the poetry of Vaughan.
Yeah. And they were distantly related, I read.
Yeah, they were third cousins thrice removed.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know what that means. But they were third cousins thrice removed. And you can, I mean, even as you were reading that now, we can come back to it, I could hear a couple of Herbert images coming through.
Yeah.
But Herbert, he said, was part of his conversion.
Yeah.
And to the changing of Vaughan writing secular poems to ones about God and faith.
And he really disowned his secular stuff, didn't he? He really sort of said, please don't touch it, please don't read it, please don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of poets say that about their early stuff.
Lots of musicians too.
Yeah, exactly. So how should we do this? Do you want to just look at the text and then tell us? I'm really interested to hear about what music has done to this.
Yeah.
But let's just look at the text for a moment or two. What are the things that are leaping out at you here that resonate?
One of the things I love about it is the rhythm, I think, and it's, well, I'll leave the music aside for a second, but it is so musical already, and I love that you get these huge, dense chunks in it. You know, the first four or five lines. There's a lot going on there already, but then you get dark, void, crude. It keeps arriving in the middle of the text. Quickenings, reprieves, opes, shuts. You keep being misdirected from what you started with.
Which I love this. It says, it begins, welcome sweet and sacred feast, welcome life. Dead I was and deep in trouble, but grace and blessings came with thee so rife. I love that.
Yeah.
Blessings coming so rife.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You can take, it's so immediate.
He's a very, if I can put it this way, he's much more of a picture poet than Herbert is.
Yeah, yeah.
And this, of course, inspired the later Romantics. So people like Wordsworth were all indebted to Vaughan. He's the precursor to Romanticism, I think, in this picturing of things. Yes, dark, void, and crude. It captures you, doesn't it? This vocabulary of his.
Yeah, and as you say, right from the very off, welcome sweet and sacred feast, welcome life. Oh, lovely. Dead I was. Hang on.
Yes.
You get one line of aren't things easy, followed by an immediate, very kind of abrupt glimpse of life as something hard and difficult.
Yeah. And then you get this sense of, as thy hand opes or shuts, healings and cuts, darkness and daylight, life and death. This is a very Herbert idea that, it's all part of the gift of life is the shadow and the light.
Yeah.
But then there's this sort of breakthrough, isn't it? But that great darkness at thy death, when the veil broke with thy last breath, did make us see the way to thee. Right in the middle of the poem, that insight.
I love that. Someone's, put the lights on halfway through.
Yes.
It's I mean, it's funny, even trying to stay away from the music I know of it, it's very hard.
Yeah.
And this moment in the setting that so many people know and love by Finzi it feels like a halfway point. It feels like everything is a precursor to this. It's all an upbeat to this moment.
I say to that.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, and then there's much more of it. And the way through the rest of the poem is very interesting. But that is the moment that you're heading for all the time from the very outset.
I mean, the other thing about communion, which he calls the poem, is it's a bit of a paradox. I always think communion in the Christian life is that it's feeding the soul, but it feeds it by making you more hungry for God.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
And you get this sense, I think, in this poem.
Yeah.
He ends by saying, you are both food and shepherd to thy sheep.
Yeah.
But you do feel that shepherd is also, he's not just settling down with you, he's also leading you on tomorrow to another little pasture. There's movement in that.
And surely
image.
that must for Vaughan have been a reaction to the kind of religious world he was occupying.
Yes.
I mean, that sense of, the opposite of stability, the opposite of security, of stillness.
The king being, beheaded.
Yeah, I mean...
Yes, a very
turbulent... I mean, he lost his house in the Civil War, didn't he? Or shortly afterwards, is that right?
Yes, I believe he did. And also, remember, churches were closing.
Yeah.
People went into hiding.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting theme in his poems. Quite often, you often get hiding. I mean, his famous poem on Nicodemus, who comes to Jesus by night.
Yeah.
There's a sense in which you can't be seen.
Well, this is all a bit things that happen in the dark, isn't it?
It is. Which, of course, is again it's a biblical theme. Moses, we're told, approaches God who's in the darkness.
Yeah.
And I always think it's very interesting, the story of the ascension that Jesus blesses when the cloud takes him out of sight.
Yeah.
So there's this play between blessing and not seeing, which you get here.
Yes, and that's so funny because one of the things that really strikes me when I read it as text are the bits that Finzi doesn't set. So there's just a couple of bits that Finzi chooses not to get near. And one of them is that although he gives, did make us see the way to thee, he then picks up immediately at, and given us sight. So he chooses not to get anywhere near. And now by these sure sacred ties, after thy blood, our sovereign good has cleared our eyes. We don't get that. We just go straight from the way to thee and given us sight, which I think is, I'd love to know why Finzi did that. Because he hasn't taken enough of the poem out for it to be just a length issue. It's already sort of the wrong length anyway, as a piece. Yes,
that's very interesting, isn't it? What people omit in translations and interpretations.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, the other poem that I absolutely... Well, the other piece of poetry from a similar era is the Leighton setting of Hymn on the Nativity, which I just think is the most extraordinary piece and set of words. But I thought about bringing it today, and then, of course, realised it's from an absolutely enormous poem that goes on and on and on.
So if people are listening to this and they heard you read it at first, and it might be a bit difficult because they haven't got it in front of them in order to follow it, and it's not a particularly easy text to immerse yourself in to begin with. If I asked you to do what can't be done, which is to paraphrase a poem.
Oh, God, it's like supervision.
What is this poem about? If people are listening saying, well, this is quite interesting, but I still don't quite know what this poem's about, how would you describe that?
Oh, I think maybe that's the wrong way of going about it. I mean, for me, it's like getting in a bath of words.
Okay.
and then you see what comes to you. I think it's less a sort of mining experience for me, but I would say that it always engages me in a thought process about the mystery of communion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I often program it for Eve of Corpus Christi, or that kind of moment where you're given more space to think about what the Eucharist might be than the 2.5-minute communion anthem that you get time for on a Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
This is different. This is a theological muscle stretching exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's about communion, what that gift might be to the church, but it's about what the gift of Christ might be in a much bigger sense, and what the interaction between that gift and Christian people might be.
Yeah. That's very helpful. I think people will find that a helpful diving board into the poem when they go back to it, maybe. Is there anything that you haven't said about this poem that you wish you had up to this point?
I don't know. I find it interesting structurally. I mean, it's not easy to hear, I suspect, for listeners, where the breaks are, and also where the line breaks are, because so many of them run on. I find that you get a big, dense opening chunk, if you like, and then you get the sort of section about darkness and sight and what that might be, and then you get 2 stanzas of "Wasn't it enough that?" These sort of, they both end with question marks, but they're rhetorical, aren't they? I quite like that exegesis, darkness, 2 questions to think about. I like that kind of, what are we being sent out to do with this text?
Yes, it's often said that you can never finish a poem, you can only ever abandon it. That its work continues whether you're there or not. You can walk away, but there's no closure.
Yeah, which is so funny, because in music, one of the things you learn very early on, in my conducting teacher used to say a lot. He said, music only has one end. Don't make 2 of them. If you try and make an end halfway through, you'll never win. It's got 1 double bar line and it goes at the end. And that actually is, it really does inform everything you think about the music. How do you deal with that musical thing or that text thing when the poem only has one end?
Yes, that's very interesting. I mean, when you say these stanzas, I mean, if you just took the first lines of each stanza, it's very, welcome sweet and sacred feast, welcome life. And then, but that great darkness at thy death wasn't not enough that thou hadst paid the price, wasn't not enough to lose thy breath.
Poem. Done.
It's sort of, you begin with life, but then you're made to see the cost of it.
Yes, and it's got a relatively lukewarm encouragement at the end.
Yes.
It's not a very, it's all right kind of ending.
It's not victorious.
No, not at all.
No.
It's
pastoral. I mean, literally, it's about shepherd.
And where are we being led is the implication of that end, isn't it?
How art thou now thy flock to keep, become both food and shepherd to thy sheep? Of course, I love the fact that in his day, shepherd is spelt with an A, so it's shepherd. So.
Yeah, we're looking at the text in his spelling, if you like, and I'd never seen it before, properly written out like this, and I really heard that as well. Heard it, sorry. It was so. I loved it when I came across it. I thought, oh yeah, of course. And again, musically, this is a really interesting moment because in Finzi setting, you get "Who Wrought Thy Woe," and then you have an organ interlude.
Yeah.
You have the beginning music comes back and just says, "Do you remember where we were at the beginning?"
Oh, I see.
And then you get this sort of coda. He divides off the difficulty from the payoff when he sets it. And you get the line that everybody's desperate to sing, which is a beautiful lyrical bit right at the end, which is really what everyone's hoping for when they open the copy, they're thinking, it's all right, in 14 pages time, there's that lovely bit about the Lily of the Valley. And I really like it in Finzi's setting, right at the end, he gives you an uneven bar. You get 5/4 bar. How art thou now? With one extra beat. Little bit of space. How art thou now? You've got a beat to tell us. And then we go on. And I love that sort of. I love Finzi. But Finzi knows. He knows what that text means. He knows what it's about. He knows how to take us by the hand through it. But he's hidden some of it.
You can always tell the composers who can read. I always think Britain could read text.
Yeah.
Well,
and fearless about that. It seems that nothing ever made him think, "Oh, that's a bit tough."
Yeah.
He just seemed to get stuck in.
There's another poem by Vaughan called "Regeneration," which I rather love, and there's a lovely line in it where he describes life, the world, himself as primrosed and hung with shade. And you do get that from this as well, that it begins with this sense of life being primrosed.
Yeah.
We have primroses on our banks. What a wonderful, but also we are hung with shades too.
Yeah.
And I love that about the metaphysicals, actually.
Darkness again.
Yes, you get both the primrose and the shade.
Yes, I think that's a better encapsulation, which I could have said at the beginning. I think that's what draws me to it, and I suspect that's why the second half of the 20th century saw such a kind of reaching for it.
Yeah.
I think this sort of societal grasping for these things are wonderful and rich and beautiful, and these things are dark and awful, and how do we navigate the world when it looks like that? And as always, I'm fascinated, and I love talking to choristers about this. I'm fascinated by voices reaching back and forth across time like that. I'm fascinated that somebody in 1950 had something to say about something from 1650, and that somebody in hopefully 2050, will have something to add to that.
Well, of course, I talked about people who used to name him as an influence. And of course, nearer our time, the other person who was greatly influenced by Henry Vaughan was Siegfried Sassoon.
Yeah.
And in many ways, they had, although separated by many years, they had quite a lot of similarities. They'd both developed through their experience a hate of war. There was a turning towards spiritual themes. Then there's a strange thing, like they both loved horses and both spent too much money on them, and there's lots of sort of weird similarities between the two. But of course, what I thought I would do is read, before you read the final poem, read Sassoon's poem, which he wrote standing at Henry Vaughan's grave.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever been to his grave.
No.
It's there in St. Bride's Church in Llanfrancide. And it's a very beautiful, peaceful space under a tree. And when I gave that paper, which almost makes me shiver again, every year at the society they lay a wreath on this grave. But Siegfried Sassoon went there, and he wrote this. And the one word that might not make too much sense is silurist, which refers to the Celtic tribes of Wales, and he always saw himself as coming from the peoples of the South Wales, known as Silurists, which is the one which is a bit more difficult to understand today. But here is Siegfried Sassoon standing at the grave of Henry Vaughan. Above the voiceful windings of a river, an old green slab of simply graven stone shuns notice, overshadowed by a yew. Here Vaughan lies dead, whose name flows on forever through pastures of the spirit, washed with dew and starlit with eternities unknown. Here sleeps the Silurist, the loved physician, the face that left no portraiture behind, the skull that housed white angels and had vision of daybreak through the gateways of the mind. Here faith and mercy, wisdom and humility, whose influence shall prevail for evermore, shine. And this lowly grave tells heaven's tranquillity. And here stand I, a suppliant at the door.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Starlit with eternities unknown could be Vaughan, couldn't it? I mean, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many beautiful images in that poem. You would be here all day, wouldn't we? But I love the... it makes reference, of course, to the fact that actually Vaughan talks about himself as being a physician.
Yeah, yes.
There's no real evidence that he studied medicine. He might have just taught himself. But yes, this lovely idea that he's standing there, this grave is telling heaven's tranquility, and here he stands a suppliant at the door.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Anyway, that's Siegfried Sassoon.
Should be more Sassoon, that's what I've learnt there.
So let's hear finally again the poem of your choice, the Holy Communion.
Welcome, sweet and sacred feast. Welcome, life. Dead I was and deep in trouble, but grace and blessings came with thee so rife that they have quickened even dry stubble. Thus souls their bodies animate, and thus at first when things were rude, dark, void and crude, they by thy word had their beauty and date, all were by thee and still must be, nothing that is or lives, but hath his quickenings and reprieves as thy hand opes or shuts. Healings and cuts, darkness and daylight, life and death are but mere leaves, turned by thy breath. Spirits without thee die, and blackness sits on the divinest wits, as on the sun eclipses lie. But that great darkness at thy death, when the veil broke with thy last breath, did make us see the way to thee. And now by these sure sacred ties, after thy blood, our sovereign good, had cleared our eyes and given us sight, thou dost unto thyself betroth our souls, and bodies both in everlasting light. Was't not enough that thou had paid the price and given us eyes when we had none, but thou must also take us by the hand and keep us still awake, when we would sleep or from thee creep, who without thee cannot stand. Was't not enough to lose thy breath and blood by an accursed death, but thou must also leave to us that did bereave thee of them both, these seals the means that should both cleanse and keep us so, who wrought thy woe. O Rose of Sharon, O Lily of the Valley, how art thou now thy flock to keep, become both food and shepherd to thy sheep.
Thank you, Helen. I've really enjoyed this, and I'm delighted, of course. You've only just arrived, so we've got years more
poetry to work through.
to talk about all these things. But thank you so much for sharing this poem with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.